I think we've had this conversation.
We did.
We did sort of.
In my recollection of the conversation.
Was to add it. Wasn't it to add it?
No, my recollection was to not add it.
Not add it.
Because there was a concern that if you start changing the border of the downtown, there are going to be people who, and we've heard it from people already, that the downtown should be even smaller, not bigger, and that it seems to me that unless the commission feels that there's something dramatic to be gained by extending the downtown out that far, that these are the borders that you've had for the study area since 2000. They appear to be working fine. They help shape the zoning in the area, and that that section of Route 72, I think, was viewed more as a gateway into the downtown, not in the downtown. Memorial Boulevard was viewed as the school was viewed as a gateway to the downtown. I guess the question is the gateway in the downtown, or at the edge of the downtown, or beyond the edge of the downtown?
Coming into the downtown.
Yeah, but my concern is that if you can expand here, well, can you contract? Are you going to, when someone says, well, I question whether the area north of Route 6 is in the downtown or not, but then there's this endless discussion about moving the borders around.
I know when we did this initially, there was a long discussion in terms of the streets.
Right.
I remember that. It took a while to define it.
So the consensus I'm getting is we're going to go with a legend in two colors. The red line will be current downtown policy area.
Right.
And the yellow line will be possible future addition to the downtown policy area. Or do you want to take the yellow off?
Let's we just eliminate the yellow.
It's the commission's pleasure.
I said take it off. It's not going to read it.
Fine with me.
If for some reason later on we decided it should, or should be somewhere, we can always change our recommendation, but I think it creates a problem. It's a challenging, this downtown is a challenging shape anyway.
Yeah, and that was a part of the discussion.
Yeah.
That the unlike many downtowns, this downtown is in some respects not very compact. You look at a lot of more traditional downtowns; they're more compact. They have a whole system of grid streets,
right.
And this is shaped by the topography and the rail line, and it's a very unusually shaped downtown. But I think Commissioner Soar's observation is a good one. That if at some future date the board wants to come back and revisit the whole downtown boundary, recast in some way, shape, or form, we can certainly do that.
Well, also, I think by not having it in there, you're maintaining the integrity of Memorial Boulevard itself. As the veterans of Memorial Boulevard, instead of chopping it up.
The other comment that I had is picking up on what Alan just mentioned, that on page 66, we're kind of having this concept of public spaces, etc., but it's a good place perhaps to put in a sidebar about the fact that there are topographic challenges in the downtown to creating a pedestrian-friendly space. We end up with sort of this orientation where it can be harder. So we need to work a little bit harder at ensuring pedestrian friendliness. And I think a sidebar, either on page 66 or maybe on 64, 65, I'll find a good place for it. I think it would be a worthwhile addition. Is the Commission okay with that?
Memorial Boulevard is the front door of that one.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Memorial Boulevard, front door. And I guess, I'm sure we went over this already, but the action steps in 67 were the first four. There's none at this time. There's none at this time.
I didn't have any specific. I mean, I think we can't make downtown a focal point immediately. There's nothing we can do right off the bat. City Hall is here, we have a lot of civic functions here, a lot goes on downtown. But it's really kind of continuing to work to bring in more uses and create more of a critical mass that's going to make downtown prosper and thrive. So,
You have design review in there again, I see, too.
well, I think that for the downtown area, and again, I think there was a survey question specifically for the downtown. Now, back on page 55, it was even stronger here. 85% of participants in the survey either agreed or strongly agreed that the design of buildings is an important consideration in any new development in the downtown area. So,
again, I recall the discussion that I believe this commission had about design review, if you will, in the downtown, and that unlike in other parts of the city, because there are design considerations that don't have as much to do with architecture as they might with the bulk of the building or where the building sits on the property or the height or the way or the use of windows and doors to break up the plane of the building so they don't look as big or they look bigger. There are provisions already in the zoning regulations that speak to that. To ensure as much as possible that new buildings get built out by the sidewalk and that their form is appropriate to a downtown location without dictating the architecture of the building. If someone wants to build a very contemporary building, they can still meet those design guidelines in terms of the form of the building and the bulk and the like, and design a very modern building or a very traditional kind of building, or kind of an amalgam of multiple styles. But this is really, I think, unlike perhaps other parts of the city. I think in any downtown, the bulk of the buildings, their shape, the arrangement of windows and doors, where the building sits on the lot, are really pretty critical to what your downtown's going to look like.
so is the verb here okay or not?
Which verb?
Great. 8.4.6.1. Is that okay?
Well, we've kind of done that.
It exists, I don't know, call it that, but
Maintain?
the components of it.
We can revisit that. See what visit that board.
And the only thing, so we'll come back to this, I imagine, probably at our fall meeting, probably in February. And the only reason I ask is that it may kick over from an action step to a policy. So, anything else in terms of downtown or Chapter 8? Have we hit the highlights?
Yes.
I think one observation that I would make is certainly interested in what commission members might feel about it. My observation was that much of what you have in the 2000 plan is reflected here, which I think the commission did a very thorough job back in 2000. I think Glenn has done a great job at reorganizing it, but I think the meat of it, the principles that you laid out in 2000 and the goals and objectives then pretty much appear to carry over here, which I think is important, again, without getting in the middle of some of the minutiae of what might be happening now. I think, I've always chuckled when people said, well, but, in the last several years, people said, well, what's the city's plan for downtown? And the answer is, the city's had a plan since 2000. It may not be a drawing that shows this building is here, this building is here, but the policies that have established how downtown should redevelop has been in place for almost 15 years. It appears that much of that is still intact here. I don't think, at least at the commission level, I don't think anybody's quibbled with the details of that stuff. Well, you may quibble with some of the details, but I think the overarching policies and goals for downtown, I think, have been, have served the city well, and appear to be reflected in this.
I think, from my perspective, I think it's helpful that the city's had these policies for some time, but I also believe that they're still relevant today, those policies, and will be relevant in the future. I think there are a lot of reasons why downtown has a lot of opportunities demographically, economically, and other things. And I think the policies will serve the city well over the next 15 years. And I think that's the important thing. Chapter 9 is about promoting business development, economic diversification, identify sort of some of the market dynamics that are going on, the survey results in terms of, for example, on page 71, the observation of people's thoughts or feelings about different types of businesses, whether we have too many, too few, or just about right in terms of different types of businesses. So it's an indication what people are interested in their community. And then, again, strategies, policies, and action steps. On page 76, there's the highlighted text again. And you may recall, we talked about this earlier. This is, again, the concept of possibly allowing expansion or modification of non-conforming uses. And we weren't quite sure where we were going to shake out on that policy. So it's in here and it's highlighted as being...
We're chocolate first.
I think the city planner was probably not in favor of that.
I think you're correct.
Of what?
The highway on 76.
So I think at this point in time, we'll continue with this in the plan. We'll mention it at the part where I'm not sure we'll get into this level of detail at the public meeting again in January. Let's see what we get for comments and then come back and address this.
This is probably out of order or something. Just popped in my mind. Did we put anything in here about blighted property?
Yes. Well, on page 50, for example, and beforehand, we're talking about property maintenance, is how we talk about that. And so on page 49, we have some policy recommendations related to property maintenance, such as continuing to encourage the properties to be maintained and rehabilitated, continuing the code enforcement approaches. On page 50, there's no specific action steps at this time, but the sidebar, the results in terms of the question was, is the city doing enough to address blighted properties? 53% thought that the city was, and 36% thought the city wasn't doing enough.
I guess my concern was what to do if blight becomes patchwork. Demolish blighted property, what I'm talking about. At some point, is there too much of that?
So the need to establish policy as to if a blighted property ends up having to be demolished, what happens to the property?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we could always look at it that we're increasing the open space in the city. But we're not that throwing it in there.
No,
I see it genuinely.
Maybe, but I don't know. I wasn't thinking in terms of what it should be, but I think I know what I don't want it to be. I don't want blighted spaces to take the place of blighted properties.
I think the question, the concern you raise is I think has been raised as part of the city's overall effort to deal with blighted properties. But perhaps if there isn't anything in here now, perhaps there should be, that either the city tries to identify a policy in the plan itself, or makes a recommendation that the city establish a policy for the reuse of properties that are vacant as the result of demolition of blighted structures, something along those lines. Because otherwise, you're right, if you don't have a plan for what you're going to do with those properties once they become vacant, then you run the risk that they become the neighborhood trash heap.
Yeah, and very high maintenance, too.
And it can be very costly if the city has to go in and constantly clean those properties up. So, do you allow the property to be rebuilt upon? Do you try to sell it to neighboring properties? Do you use it for open? I mean, that's not an unreasonable. In some neighborhoods, maybe having a couple of pieces of vacant property that can be used informally, but there's a cost associated with that. If the city owns it and maintains it as a neighborhood open space or a playground area, you're still going to maintain it. So in the absence of a definitive policy, you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants every time a structure gets knocked down and you have a vacant piece of property.
Then it could be a liability issue too.
Oh, that's a good point. So it may be that
Well, I believe the real estate committee is attempting to sell the open lots, which is doing wonders for the value of my building lots. So as they drive down the price it's an unintended consequence that I am personally feeling the pain from. I can't sell the building lots now, or the building lot now, and the prices are being driven down by property opening up and selling it. I only wish that I had that. Do I have blighted property? Well, some of my neighbors might think so. I don't. I think I meet the requirements of not being blighted property, but the point that I'm making is that this whole policy of blight, I mean, it's a great thing that we're getting rid of these, but what we're doing is
But there's more to it.
we're putting more building lots on the market at a reduced cost that are making my lot that much more difficult to sell.
I think more importantly than your lot, no offense.
Well, I understand. Well, it's not just my lot, but it's contractors
Right.
in general and builders in general. By having this extra inventory in the city now, and with no plan to do anything, and the only plan that I know of is they're trying to sell it.
Right, and if you can't sell them, again, and I think your big picture observation is the important one, which is that there are unintended consequences no matter what you do, and if either the planning commission could try to identify a policy in this plan, or even if it lays out what the array of options might be, or if you don't want to go to that extent, establishing an action step that the city establish a clearly defined property for the reuse of these pieces of property, so that it becomes clear that if a property has to be, the building has to be torn down because it's so blighted that it can't be repaired, that there's a policy in place as to here's what happens, here's what should happen, here's the steps that should happen once that piece of property is vacant.
A neighborhood park would be a nice thing.
Right. But there's a cost involved for the city to maintain that neighborhood park.
Quality of life issue.
Well, that's a decision, but that quality of life it all has a cost. And that's why, again, as you said, there's unintended consequences. I think people have to, the city needs to establish a clear policy. Because it's an issue that's not going to, it's not going to go away with the next administration, whether that might be. It's in a community where you have a housing stock that is old, where you have a lot of properties certainly a healthy share of properties that are not owner occupied, that perhaps are not in the best of shape, the issue isn't going to go away.
And I think also a good point to make, and it's probably just stating the obvious, is that when the building inspector or the city knocks down a house, it's after a long, long series of events to try to get the property owners to comply. And it's done out of a need to protect the health and safety of the neighborhood and the folks who might be inhabiting that building. So you're getting rid of one problem to promote the health and safety of the city, but yet creating another unintended consequence for folks who live around the properties and who want to see investment in the neighborhood. Again, Alan spoke, and get off into much of a tangent here. We're not the only city that deals with this in the United States. Detroit, I think, has experimented with slow-growing grass. So when a building gets knocked down, they plant a lawn, but it's slow-growing, so the city only has to come by 2 or 3 times in the summer and cut the grass. There's lots of cities struggling with this issue, as we found. Just Google it on the internet, you'll see.
Yeah, I think Bob raised a really good point, is that again, to the credit of this administration, and I think in general, the process, when a blighted property is torn down, it's at the end of a long process. The building official, we have those conversations with the building official, the zoning officer, and the representatives of the health district, that they're doing everything they can within reason and within the law to try to get the building's owner or a prospective owner to make the necessary repairs and upgrades to get the building off the blight list and make it a safe and decent, safe and sanitary place for people to live. Doing so keeps the property in the tax rolls, avoids some of the issues that we've talked about, but there's still going to be instances where all else has failed and the structure comes down. And now you got another set of issues to deal with. So.
I've made a note in my plan on page 50 that I think we'll come back and talk about this. I think we may hear some comments on this at the public information meeting, so we can take notes at that one time and go from there. We'll be back on Chapter 9, pages 69 to 78. Any thoughts, comments on Chapter 9?
Local brew pump testing facility?
We had the elevator testing facility, we had the 2 testing facilities. I just wanted to see if anybody picked up on it. I saw it, it didn't really register. So no, I didn't. Testing facility should come out.
City of testing.
This is supposed to be the first document.
Planning humor here, Al. Planning humor.
Known for the city of Texas.
There you go. All right, so Chapter 10 now talks about guiding residential development in the city. On page 81 again, we report on the survey results, people's sense of whether Bristol's housing mix has too few, too many, or just about right of different types of housing. Overall goals for the city, policies, particularly in terms of neighborhood stability, housing design, housing diversity, and then action steps as well. And then you may recall on page 88, we did have some conversations about some specific locations in the city in terms of trying to preserve, maintain the integrity of residential neighborhoods, and those are mentioned there.
And if I might have page 84, item 5 speaks to the initial facilities. Question about property maintenance.
Anything else on 10? Chapter 11 gets into specific neighborhoods and places within the city, some of which are special studies, but just...
Well, yeah, can we go back to the second on page 87? I had a question. I almost hesitate to bring it up, but it is in here as under the housing diversity action step. Initiate a program to create more housing for senior citizens. And I understand that it's an aging population, and as someone who is, I guess I'd consider it a senior citizen. I guess I'm a little bit concerned about targeting or identifying senior citizens as I don't want to say to the exclusion of anybody else, but I mean, it appears to me there's more emphasis there on housing for seniors than for other age groups. And I'm concerned that if part of what the city is trying to do is not just accommodate seniors, but to attract younger people as well, I'm concerned that there's a specific emphasis on housing for senior citizens. I think there would be some people who would argue that there's a lot of housing for senior citizens already, and that perhaps I don't want to stop building it, but perhaps there shouldn't be as much emphasis, or there should be more emphasis on other, other age groups.
And yet the survey, says 44% thinks there's too few.
Right, and I think you also have to look at the demographics of the survey.
Right.
I don't know that it seems to be, without any emphasis on it, it seems to be fairly active, if that's the right word, active. Anyway, I mean, there's no shortage of ideas about building, I think, senior citizen housing here, there, as opposed to other specific kinds of housing.
Right.
It has been for a while.
Right.
I know when we talked about this, I brought up, defining affordable housing. I mean, that was another thing. What is affordable housing?
Housing you can afford to pay.
That's a good definition.
So
I think this may not be worded well. Let me throw out some concepts here. I think the idea here was that, I'm not trying to highlight, if you will, one demographic group or anything else, but I think the issue that is of concern in communities like Bristol and other places is that elderly are living longer than they ever have. Their financial resources, not everybody has been able to have planned or prepared or set aside enough resources to last for their anticipated lifespan. So the issue that we have coming up is perhaps housing for senior citizens with low or moderate incomes. And so I think that's really the issue here. So there may be some wording that's missing here. I don't, off the top of my head, remember the data in terms of the wait list at the local elderly housing projects, but the issue is, as our elderly population is projected to increase in the future, the elderly population with modest assets and incomes is going to be growing significantly as well. So we have a wait list today, it's going to get worse in the future. And really the way to start to address that is we're going to have to consider finding ways to provide more units. So I don't think this is worded as well as it should.
Yeah, and I know that the term that I think we've started to see in some publications that deal with this are the concept of aging in place.
The aging in place can work,
right,
except that, again, if you have...
place.
Well, not just that, but the issue is whether or not you can afford your place.
Right.
So depending on level of insulation, housing costs, taxes, and other things,
right,
the advantage to assisted facility, a lower cost facility, is that it's indexed to your actual income. And so as a result, if you're a lower moderate income elderly, it may be the only choice you've got.
I think, and again, some of this may be perception. I think when you start talking about, and I think Commissioner Swartz kind of put his finger on part of this, is that everybody appears to be willing to build housing for the elderly. I mean, that's easy and everybody's going to embrace it. But I think what's being neglected is that And I know that I'm going to experience it. I know I have a brother, older brother who's retired, he's up in Syracuse, and he's experiencing it. And he and his wife is also retired, experience it, is that baby boomers, many baby boomers don't want housing for the elderly. I don't want to go to because that has visions of retirement community, and we play golf, and we also, what they want, what many, not everybody, but what many boomers want is, I want a place where I don't have to cut the grass, I don't have to shovel snow, but I'm in amongst people who maybe are not all my age, but it's close to, it's within walking distance of neighborhood shops and services, or if there's a college in the community, that's what I want. I don't want housing for senior citizens.
I think the market's going to take care of that one, Alan. I think, again, I don't think this one's worded well.
No.
I think the issue is we're dealing with people with modest incomes here, and the market will not address that need.
I had some alternative wording, and I don't know
Go
if
ahead.
it's too broad. Initiate a program to create a diverse housing stock for all members of the community.
That's almost too obtuse. Just,
I know, I thought it was, but I wanted to
the
just throw it
commission feels is
Throws it
appropriate here.
everywhere.
But the glaring need in the future will be having enough housing for elderly households of modest means.
For active adults.
Active adults have assets and resources, and the market will take care of that, and people will buy it, it will sink or swim. The issue is an elderly person who's on Social Security with $1,000 a month.
Like my mother-in-law.
What are they going to do? And the issue is they don't always have family or other situations that are available to them. The issue is the only solution, the housing solution that's available to them is some type of assisted housing development. By assisted, I don't mean...
No, I know what you mean.
So,
Income assisted.
that's really what I was trying to get at here. Let me, I think this is worded poorly. Let me try to come up with some wording with Alan and Bob that sort of kind of gets to this, and we'll talk about this in February, I think.
Do we even want this in there?
Well,
We're talking about
Yeah.
a policy of subsidizing a generation that has made poor decisions,
Are we talking-
overspent their assets.
Are we talking about
Got a
that?
second mortgage, and we're talking about initiating a city program at a cost to the taxpayer to subsidize those individuals that didn't plan well during their life.
Is that what we're talking
This is a
about?
political issue.
How did we get there?
How did we get there?
From rewording something according to...
Well, if
Coming from
you just
it.
read this, it says to initiate a program to create more housing. That, to me, is just...
I don't see subsidizing.
Well, of course it's subsidizing. We're creating a city-based program to create more housing for senior citizens, and he's saying that the senior citizens that we're targeting are those of very limited income and means, and how did they get to that
Modest.
position?
Modest.
Or modest. Well, however you want to call it. We're-
All right, so again, I apologize because this one is very badly worded and it's all my fault. So, initiate a program does sound like it's a city program or policy, and that really most of these types of housing developments are funded by federal and other programs. So, it's taxpayer money, no question about it, but it's not a problem that's going to necessarily fall to city taxpayers. I think the issue here is seek ways to create more housing for senior citizens with modest incomes. And that could cover a lot of different things. But I would suggest that it doesn't have to be in the plan, but I think it is going to be something which is going to be of greater and greater concern over time. And so just being aware of it is something I would urge us to consider.
Again, if you're saying that it's a program that's going to be a federally subsidized program, why are we putting it in as an action step to whether it's initiate a program, however you want to state this? What you're saying is you want to put policy in here that says that we should be subsidizing. I'm sorry, I know low income wasn't a good wording before. Help me out, John. What was it?
I don't see
Modest.
subsidizing in there. I just see
Modest
initiating a
income.
policy which is a long way from specifics.
I agree. All right, so I think you bring up a good point, whether or not this should actually be an action step or not. So I've circled that, I've added that notation. let me ponder this, and I think we'll come back to this in February, because at that point in time, we have to make a decision which way we're going to go with this.
And remember the survey.
And I think the fact that it's listed in the action steps, again, that was what was most glaring to me. You know, it's in a section about housing diversity and providing all kinds of housing opportunities for all kinds of people. And then I look at the action step, and the only action step is
Diversity of seniors.
for senior citizens. Like, what about
Everybody else.
other people? So, and again, I'm not trying to beach up, but it's like either, if we're going to have action steps, there ought to be more than one for just one segment of the population, or there's no action steps, and you know, maybe the housing diversity policies need to be you know, beefed up or clarified or expanded.
Remember the survey results, too.
And again, not to belabor the point, but I guess I am, if we are, we're beating this one. I think Glenn's point was a good one, that, you know, I know just from personal knowledge that in the area, most waiting lists for senior housing are about 3 years. And, you know, these folks are waiting for this housing. Maybe a spouse passed away, and now they don't have a lot of resources or assets. Mostly a lot of, you know, us men tend to die earlier, and a lot of you know, women are left on their own and don't have the resources possibly to have the housing that they need. And I think Glenn's point was that this is only going to continue to grow. This demographic is growing and growing by leaps and bounds, and we need to recognize the issue. So
I agree 100% that it's an issue.
yeah.
But I believe that issue needs to be addressed by the federal government, not by the Bristol Plan of Conservation.
But it is a local issue.
It's an issue everywhere.
Bristol residents are dealing with the issue.
All right, I think, okay. Good topic, we'll come back to it.
Before we leave this chapter, Glenn, back to the page 84.
Yeah.
Policy number 6, I think you briefly mentioned, but I wonder what Alan and Bob think about that.
Policy already exists.
Does?
It's on page 81 of the current plan. If I can find it. Glenn, I know, modified it slightly. It's in 81, it's in the future land use plan, 81, policy number 9. It reads, permit established residential neighborhoods to maintain the same pattern of development as in the past, even though this might result in small lots or multifamily units. And I think the one thing Glenn added was lesser setbacks.
So is that something that's actually come up in practice? As
Yeah.
The zoning commission?
No, I think it's one of the reasons, for example, why you have the mixed residential zone, the RM zone, and the BT zone that allow for smaller lots. So that's the pattern of development. Even though the zoning, you know, the underlying zone might be an R15 or R10, just the overlay. So in practice, the zoning commission, in fact, has pretty much followed that.
Got it.
Chapter 11, again, really starts to talk about some of the work the commission has done in particular neighborhoods in the city. So, for example, Forestville is, I guess, the second most identifiable node in the city after downtown. And there has been some work that's gone on there with the Yukon studies. I guess it still is CCRPA for another 36 hours or 27 hours or whatever. Some recommendations in here for Forestville, for the West End. Recommends on page 94, 95, looking at Route 6 and possibly a special study along Route 6. Continuing to manage development along Route 72. Pages 98 and 99, we talk about institutional development such as Bristol Hospital and some of the other institutional facilities in the city. Those are the recommendations, if you will, about specific neighborhoods and places and uses, et cetera, in the city. Any thoughts on Chapter 11?
Bob and I talked about this in the office earlier today. And I can't say we've reached any conclusions, but again, part of what the commission has to say. I had a couple of concerns about this section. One concern was, and I haven't talked to Glenn about it, so I think hearing from Glenn will be very helpful, is that the portion, the sections about Forestville and the West End and the Route 72 corridor have all been the subject of other studies. And I guess part of the concern I have, notwithstanding the fact that there's a very clear reference in the document, in the sidebars, that you can go to the West End neighborhood study, you can go to the Route 72 corridor study and see additional recommendations and details. I'm concerned that someone looking at this sees this sort of select group of policies and says, oh, those are the policies, when in fact there's an entire study. And I'm wondering if there is value to, on one hand, you don't want to replicate the whole study in here. It's like, how much of the study do you need to put in here? There's a whole, I mean, could it be as simple as simply giving people a general overview of these and saying, for the complete study, go look at the study? I'm concerned that people will read these policies and think that's all there is if they don't go any farther. I think the section about Route 6, I think, is very helpful because you haven't really looked at Route 6 in any kind of detail. And just to round out the concerns I have is the section on managing institutional development. I think the concept is an important one. I'm concerned that we're calling out some very specific facilities, and I'm concerned about getting into why is our facility identified above their facility, or why isn't ours identified? But I'm wondering if there's a way to take a more general approach to this, which I think is done in some of the policies, without getting into, well, there's this facility here and they do this and that. I'm just kind of concerned about that. I mean, this section is the one that makes me perhaps most uncomfortable. Not in a, if the commission says, no, you're fine, we're fine. But it just seems to me that there's a fair amount of repetition from other studies, which I think it's good to identify those other studies because they're important words that
just refer to them.
Well, I think I provide a little bit of an overview, but I don't know from where I sit. Again, I think it's important here from Glenn. It's not clear to me. I'm concerned that someone will read this and see half the policies or a third of them and go, oh, that's why these and why not others. I don't. From where I sit, I'd rather say to people, here's the overview, here's the study that was done. You can get a more in-depth understanding of the issues and the policies that resulted by going to read that, and here's the the reference document.
And if I could take the opposite point of view, I think what Glenn has done is very good here. I would just take the 3 studies that have already occurred.
West End?
Forestville, West End, 72, and group those together and put Route 6 after that. But I do share Alan's concerns with the institutional part. I think Alan's concerns are well-founded as far as calling out specific institutions. So I think 11.6 needs to be massaged. I think also what Glenn has done is good. Obviously, it needs to be tweaked here with the individual plans. I think having a study of Route 6 is a good idea. With the studies that already exist, or one that will be promulgated soon, we could always put an electronic link in the document that folks, while it's going on the internet, they can click on that link and go right to the document itself. And you can encourage them to do that.
Yeah, and the idea of perhaps putting the Forestville overview and the West End overview and the Route 72 corridor overview in one section these subject, that may be a good approach to handling it, and then
Route 6 by itself.
and then Route 6.
And Route 6 is aspirational.
Right.
So, makes sense.
I know we've thrown a lot at you, but I wanted you to hear from you.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
I have a question on one of the action steps on page 93. It says, support the timely acquisition and reactivancy of foreclosed properties. Shouldn't that be for all properties across the city, not just the West End?
Oh,
11.343, the fourth bullet down. It says, support the timely acquisition and reactivancy of foreclosed properties. I would hope we would be doing that everywhere, not just the West End. Maybe right now the need is in the West End, but who knows? In 5 years from now, maybe it'll be Chippen's Hill.
yeah, I don't have my copy of the West End neighborhood study, but Glenn indicates that that came out of the West End study, which point is well taken. It may be something that, although it started with the West End study, may be applicable
Across the whole city.
across the whole city.
Can't you put it somewhere where we could mention policy?
And the same thing goes for the bullet above it, the targeted blighted properties for comprehensive code enforcement efforts.
Yeah, which I think is referenced in other sections.
Yeah, it
right?
is referenced in other sections, but
Right.
in this particular chapter,
Well, again, that's
we're calling out.
Again, that's why I question, why include, again, if you look at the West End neighborhood study, there's a whole series of recommendations. It's more than this, and I recognize this is a representative sample, but it's like, where I sit, I'd rather have nothing in here. It's like, you want to know what those policies are, what those recommendations are, read the study.
Well, that's what it says.
No, there's a list of...
See the West End study for additional recommendations.
Right, but if someone doesn't do that,
They're going to think this is it.
right, that's the concern that I have, that they're going to read this, oh, that's it, I don't need to read that. I know it says that, but if they don't get their eyes over to here and then get to the study, I'd almost, and this is just my personal preference, that I'd rather not have the policies and the action steps for West End or Forestville or Route 70 Carter in this study.
Just an overview.
Just the overview and then a reference to the details to the
I
study.
think what I'd like to suggest for your consideration is that we get rid of those subheaders. So for example, on page 90 and 91, we're talking about, well, let's go to 92, 93, I'm sorry. Let's talk about the West End. So right now, we have 11.3.3, which is policies, 11.3.4, which is action steps. I agree. This reinforces what Alan says. So my suggestion is we get rid of those headers, and we say something like studies. The study includes policies such as, and the study recommends action steps such as, and then we put a big blue box here above this graphic that says, go see the study, and as Bob indicates, it's a link that you click on it online and it takes you right to the study. So we reference the study, we want people to go see it. We kind of summarize its highlights, but we don't want to leave that impression. I think the issues, I agree with the order here, that the studies that have been done, such as Forestville, West End, and Route 72, should be the first three. Route 6 should be pushed back. And I think this question about institutional development, I think maybe we just take it.
I think the issue is a good issue.
It is a really good issue. Where does it go?
I'm not really sure, and it may be in this section, but it just may be...
More generic.
Yeah. I think that the issues that it raises are good. And again, I don't want to pick on Bristol Hospital, but that's a good example. Perhaps the best example is that you have this institution that exists in the city for almost 100 years, and it has some very positive impacts on the community, but it has some potentially negative impacts on the neighborhood. That's where we deal with that, not all the time, but a lot. The zoning commission's dealt with it a lot over the years. So I think it identifies an important issue. And I think
there's some other ones that are in here too. So I think we should spend quite a bit of time talking about 98 and 99, because on the religious facilities, we've got not a proliferation going on, but they become tax-exempt facilities that do have impacts on their neighbors. In terms of social service facilities, Manchester, I understand, is looking to try to promote legislation this session dealing with the community's fair share of social service facilities. And if Bristol's taking on more than its fair share. I think doing your fair share is great. Doing more than that starts to have other implications. I think educational institutions, private clubs, the courthouse, the implications that has for the downtown area, and also possible state or federal facilities. My thought process is that having these in the plan, this text may not get read or used for 9 years, and then suddenly there's going to be something that comes up and give the commission something. So how to do this, I think, is really kind of a key question. We should think this one through.
Yeah, but I think Bob's suggestion is a good starting point, that it has to be a little more generic, because these kinds of institutions, and I think you pointed out, they can enhance the overall quality of life, but they can be problematic, depending on what they are and where they're located.
So what I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to email Bob these 3 pages and tell him to distill it down to 1.
So we're only here half day tomorrow.
That's going to be even better for him.
Send it at 8:20, so when I get ready.
No.
My coffee.
11:15.
Oh, that gives them an hour. Thanks.
And you can't do it that now.
This might be a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Good.
You want to just try to finish?
Well, we still have public comments, so I don't need for that.
We're almost there. You've come this far. I don't mean to push you guys, but...
No, you're right.
Well, why go to the edge of
If we were to try to hang in, it's up to you guys, but if we were to try to hang in here till the end, just the few chapters that are left, we've completed the commission's first review, we'll get the public's review, and that means then when we do get together in February, we've got a complete plate. If we don't finish this, we got to finish this up with the public comments, and then it might push the discussion off a little bit.
All right, let's keep going.
I don't know that there's too much more here, but any other thoughts or comments on the development section? I think on the infrastructure theme of the plan, Chapter 12 addresses community facility needs, and here, we're addressing things like City Hall, the educational facilities, public safety facilities and services, public works garages, etc., and identifying policies and action steps for the commission and the community to consider for the future. Anything to jump out at any people here? We're able to rely on a lot of the work that was done for the space needs analysis for the city departments here.
Right.
So I think
In the schools.
Yep. And the survey results have been integrated as well. Chapter 13. Yeah, got it. Good. Okay. Chapter 13 addresses issues related to transportation. Again, vehicular transportation. On page 115, we've identified key routes for travel within the community overall.
Glenn, this map, this key routes map, has been a map that has been kind of evolving over time. Paul has had some input, and Alan and I, and Glenn. And I'm just very pleased with the way that it's come out and the way that it's been labeled. I think it conveys the right message. And from considering where we started from, I was looking through some of my notes today, and we had several maps that we were working with, and I think the final product here is a good working product.
Proposals for pedestrian circulation. On page 116 and 117, we have a map. We're able to identify where sidewalks exist in the city of Bristol today, and you can see that we kind of have a patchwork quilt in certain areas where sidewalks don't really sort of connect other things. And we've tried to identify here with colors the areas which we think could be higher priority pedestrian areas because there's more destinations or schools or other activities going on or smaller lot sizes as a way to try to increase the sense of importance or priority in terms of interconnecting these areas. And again, this is part of the purpose or the value of the plan is to work on this and refine this over time. Page 118 and 119, we talk about bicycle routes and suitability and advocate for the city perhaps considering ways to improve or enhance bicycle suitability and bicycle circulation in the future. We also recognize the rail transit study that's been undertaken and the concepts in the Waterbury corridor in terms of trying to improve rail corridors. On page 120 and 121, we tried to map here. Bristol's bus service is, I'd have to say, somewhat unique in the way that we really sort of have two routes, I guess what I call a northern route and a southern route. But if you were actually trying to use this for commuting or other purposes, the routes are so variable that you could probably go eastbound, but you couldn't get to the same place coming back westbound. So it's just very sort of strange. And so these color codes show the areas with the best, the green shows the areas with the best service, the yellow shows areas with sporadic service, and it's really actually kind of hard. So the plan advocates for trying to rationalize this bus transit approach overall.
You may want to, with the impending opening of the Connecticut Fast Track Busway, I know that the Connecticut Department of Transportation is, I think, as part of their effort to encourage ridership on Connecticut Fast Track or CT Fast Track. They're looking to increase the number, the frequency of bus service in Bristol connected to the Fast Track Busway. I don't know how recently you've had any kind of conversation with them, but some of what's in here now may change quickly, so it may be worth reconnecting with them if you haven't already done so, because some of this information may be obsolete.
I think